Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be diving in again.
So today we're exploring this idea that seems to be popping up everywhere in politics, the failure of the center.
Yeah, what does that actually mean? Why might it be happening?
Exactly, and what's driving it underneath. We've got some really interesting sources to help us unpack this today.
We do. We've got bits from Richard Wolff's Economic Update, that interview with Slavoj Zizek on Unheard.
Novera Media's analysis of a Polish election, which adds a twist.
And that blog post from Nick's Nuances, the one called Harris's Smart Power versus Trump's Blunt Power. Two strategies, same system.
Right. So our mission here is to kind of pull out the key threads from these. We want to trace this idea of the center failing, where we first started really thinking about it recently, how these different voices explain it, and importantly, where it gets a bit more complicated.
Basically, giving you a shortcut to understanding these pretty significant political dynamics we're seeing.
And it's interesting, because this whole line of thought, for us anyway, really kicked off with that Nick's Nuances blog post from 2024.
The Harris versus Trump one.
Yeah. It seemed to introduce this core idea that maybe the center's own strategies are part of the problem.
That's exactly right. That piece really made us stop and think because it laid out this contrast between what it called smart power and blunt power.
Using figures like Harris and Trump as sort of archetypes.
Yeah, as examples of those approaches.
Okay, so smart power, blunt power. Let's break those down. What did the blog mean by smart power? What's the idea there?
So smart power, according to the blog, is what you often see with more, let's say, traditional or centrist politics. It's focused on maintaining stability.
Keeping things steady.
Right. Gradual change, working through the existing institutions, trying to keep various stakeholders reasonably happy. It's about projecting competence and making incremental progress within the system we have.
Okay, sounds reasonable on the surface. But the blog suggested there's a potential downside, didn't it? That this whole approach might not be working as intended.
Exactly. That's the core argument. The blog suggests that this smart power approach, especially when you see leaders using progressive language,
Talking the talk.
but not delivering actual fundamental systemic change, well, that can inadvertently breed a lot of disillusionment.
How so?
The blog describes it as potentially co-opting movements or popular ideas, taking the language but not the substance, without really shifting the underlying power structures.
So people hear the promises, they hear the rhetoric about change.
But they look around and see the same basic systems, the same inequalities, maybe just managed a bit more smoothly, and that can lead to cynicism.
Cynicism about the whole establishment, you mean?
Yeah, a feeling that the system is just managing expectations, not actually solving problems. The very effort to keep things stable, if it ignores deep-seated issues, can create resentment.
So that feeling of being left behind, or maybe even betrayed by the establishment. And the blog connects that directly to the rise of the other kind of power, blunt power.
Yes. Blunt power, which the blog uses Trump as an example for, is kind of the opposite. It's disruptive. It aims for immediate, visible actions.
Things you can see happening right away.
Exactly. It tends to mobilize supporters through very direct appeals, often bypassing or even attacking established norms and institutions.
It often feels much more chaotic, doesn't it?
It can, yeah. And the blog argues this approach fuels polarization. It erodes trust in those traditional institutions.
Can shift loyalty more towards the leader as a person rather than the system.
Right. It's about impact, disruption, maybe even a kind of perceived authenticity rather than careful process and stability.
Okay, here's the kicker, though, the link the blog makes. It argues that years, maybe decades, of these smart power strategies,
Especially the ones that promised more than they delivered.
may have actually created the conditions for someone like Trump to succeed. That anti-establishment feeling born from disappointment with the center.
Becomes fertile ground. People feel the system failed them, so they look for someone who promises to smash it.
It's a really provocative idea. But what's fascinating, too, is the blog's conclusion about both approaches.
Right, that's crucial. The blog argues that despite looking like total opposites, both smart power and blunt power might, in the end, serve to maintain the existing power structures.
How does that work? Seems counterintuitive for blunt power.
Well, smart power maintains things through co-option, incrementalism, keeping things stable, even if flawed. Blunt power, paradoxically, might do it through polarization and distraction.
Distraction.
Yeah, by focusing everyone's attention on cultural battles, on personality, on constant disruption, it can actually divert attention away from tackling those deeper economic or systemic inequalities. So the underlying system remains just amidst more noise and anger.
Wow. Okay, so that blog post gives us a really strong starting point. The center's own playbook, maybe its failures to deliver, can feed the opposition. Now let's bring in Slavoj Zizek. How does his view from that unheard interview connect here?
Zizek, well, he pushes this even further, you could say.
Right.
He looks at someone like Trump getting elected and insists very emphatically that this wasn't some fluke.
Not just a weird one-off event.
Definitely not. Not an aberration that just fell from the moon, as he put it.
So what is it then in his view?
His core claim is that figures like Trump are a symptom effect.
A symptom.
Yeah, like a fever is a symptom of an illness. For Zizek, Trump, or figures like him, are a symptom, a direct consequence of the failure of the mainstream liberal democratic welfare state itself.
Whoa, that's a heavy diagnosis, a symptom of the system's failure.
It is, and he's pretty bleak about the prospects for that traditional system.
I remember that. He basically says its time is up.
Pretty much. He states quite bluntly, the time of that is over. He sees that traditional liberal democratic model as having kind of run out of steam, unable to genuinely address the core issues people are facing now.
So Zizek's analysis really doubles down on the blog's idea, doesn't it? He's saying, yes, the system is failing, and these disruptive figures are the proof. It's not an attack from outside on a healthy system.
It's more like a sign that the system itself is unwell. The blog maybe described how the failure manifests tactically the smart power gap, while Zizek gives this deeper, more fundamental diagnosis of systemic breakdown.
Okay, but why is it failing? What are the specific pressures causing this breakdown or disillusionment? Richard Wolff, in his economic update analysis, seems to bring in a really crucial economic factor, especially looking at Europe.
Yes, Wolff draws a pretty direct line. He observes in Europe a clear correlation between economic decline or worsening economic conditions for ordinary people and populations turning away from traditional center parties in elections.
So when people's wallets get hit, they vote out the establishment parties.
That's the pattern he points to. He specifically mentioned Germany, I believe, as an example where you can see this happening. Economic conditions get tougher for large segments of the population, and support for centrist parties shrinks as voters look for alternatives.
Right, so Wolff adds a really important piece here. He connects the strategic failures or systemic issues that the blog and Zizek talk about to the tangible, material reality of economic hardship.
Exactly. It suggests that economic pressure is a major catalyst, a driver, pushing people away from the parties that have been overseeing the economy. It grounds the whole failure of the center idea in people's lived economic experience, extending it beyond just the U.S. context.
It makes the abstract ideas feel much more concrete. Economic strain fuels the rejection of the center.
Seems to be a powerful factor, according to Wolff's analysis, in that European context.
Okay, so just as we're thinking, all right, it's about the center's strategy failing, it's a symptom of the system, and economics is a big driver.
Along comes the Polish example.
Exactly. That Novera media analysis of the Polish election throws a bit of a wrench into the works, or at least adds significant complexity.
It really does, because at first glance, Poland looks a bit different, doesn't it? Especially compared to Wolff's point about broad economic decline. Novera Media was looking at Poland electing a right-wing nationalist president.
Right. And the immediate thought is, hang on, Wolff linked rejection of the center to economic decline, but Poland's economy overall has done relatively okay, certainly compared to some other European countries.
Yeah, it hasn't seen the same kind of widespread slump. So the simple equation economic decline equals rejection of center seems challenged.
So it can't just be about the big economic picture.
That's the question the source raises. Novera Media dives right into that. It asks basically, are those overall all right economic numbers telling the whole story? Could they be masking other pressures?
Other forms of inequality or discontent?
Precisely. And the source highlights one major factor that was apparently driving a lot of the discontent there, even with decent GDP growth.
It was.
It points specifically to the migrant situation. That was cited as a really key cause of public dissatisfaction.
Okay, but how does that connect to the failure of the center idea? Is it just xenophobia or something more systemic?
Well, the source argues it's linked to a perceived decline in the quality of public services.
Wow.
The argument presented is that the pressure from the migrant situation was seen by many polls as straining things like healthcare, schools, social support.
The things people rely on day to day.
Exactly. And the source emphasizes this connection to people's daily material realities. Even if the overall economy is growing, if your experience is that public services are getting worse, that feels like a failure.
So it's not necessarily a failure of the economy in the broad sense, but a perceived failure of governance by the center or the establishment to manage a specific, complex issue like immigration in a way that protects the quality of life and services people expect.
That seems to be the argument. It shifts the focus, doesn't it? From just economic growth figures to the perceived competence of the center in handling complex challenges and their tangible impacts.
Yeah, it does. It makes it about effective management of public goods.
And the source touches on those debates, questioning whether traditional liberal approaches adequately balanced managing immigration flows with maintaining service quality. It raises questions about careful planning versus maybe more open approaches, and where Poland might have fallen short in that balancing act, leading to this discontent.
That adds a really important layer of nuance. The Polish case suggests the rejection of the center isn't always driven by a straightforward economic downturn. It can also stem from the center's perceived failure to manage specific, challenging issues.
Issues that directly impact public services and daily life, even if the macroeconomic indicators look relatively stable on the surface.
So it's still a failure, but maybe a failure of effective governance on specific fronts, rather than just overall economic stewardship.
It shows the pressure points can be different in different places. It could be broad economics, or it could be the perceived mismanagement of social issues that hits home for people.
Okay, let's try and bring all these threads together then. What's the bigger picture emerging from this deep dive across these different sources?
Well, if you connect the dots, what emerges is a pattern, really. These sources collectively suggest that the established political center, whether it's through its own strategic choices, like the smart power approach that might overpromise and underdeliver on systemic change,
Or through perceived failures in handling really complex specific issues like public services under pressure from things like migration.
can inadvertently end up creating the very conditions for widespread public disillusionment.
And that disillusionment, that feeling that the establishment isn't delivering or isn't managing things effectively.
That opens the door. It makes people much more receptive to alternatives, often turning towards non-traditional figures or parties who promise disruption or claim to stand outside that failed center.
So understanding this dynamic, this potential failure of the center, is pretty crucial for you, the listener, right? Because it helps make sense of some really big political shifts we're seeing all over the world.
Absolutely. It moves beyond just looking at, say, Trump in the US or nationalist parties in Europe as isolated phenomena. It suggests there might be underlying systemic issues, maybe strategic missteps by the mainstream that are contributing to these trends globally.
It encourages us to look beneath the surface rhetoric of the disruptors and analyze the conditions, the potential failures or blind spots within the established center that allowed them to gain traction in the first place.
Exactly. It helps frame what we're seeing not just as random political noise, but often as a direct, understandable, if sometimes problematic, response to what people feel they are or maybe aren't getting from the traditional political establishment.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the journey we took. We started with that Nick's Nuances blog post, the Harris-Trump one, which really framed this for us. It introduced the idea that the center's smart power approach, particularly the gap between talk and action, could actually fuel the rise of blunt power.
And Zagat came in with that stark diagnosis, arguing figures like Trump aren't aberrations, but symptom effects of a deeper, maybe even terminal failure within the liberal democratic system itself.
Richard Wolff grounded it economically, showing that clear link in Europe between economic decline and voters rejecting centrist parties, connecting systemic failure to tangible hardship.
And finally, the Novera media analysis of Poland added that crucial layer of complexity. It showed that rejection of the center isn't always about macroeconomics. It can also be driven by perceived failures in governing specific issues, like immigration's impact on public services, that affect daily life even when the overall economy seems okay.
So we've seen this failure explored through different angles: strategic choices, systemic breakdown, economic pain, and specific governance challenges.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on, perhaps. If that original blog post is onto something, and both the smart power of the center and the blunt power of the disruptors might, in their own ways, end up preserving the underlying power structures,
One through managing and co-opting, the other through polarizing and distracting.
then what would a genuinely different path look like? A path that could lead to real systemic change, not just a different style of managing the status quo.
And if the traditional center is struggling to provide answers, and the current challengers aren't necessarily offering fundamental change either, Where might that truly transformative politics emerge from?
Something to definitely keep in mind as you watch things unfold.
Indeed. Well, thank you for going on this deep dive with us today.